So welcome back to another episode of Simon Says, and today we want to talk about the state of the nation, just basically looking at what's happening. Joining me today is Lyra.
Hello.
And Lyra, we have not been doing this for a while, right? Looking at the news media article and just commenting. Now, of course, we did a short discussion on KJ and Sharil, which is a little bit of state of the nation, but more kind of like within the UMNO political turmoil. So what have you been seeing and reading?
Well, I think what has come into the headlines is what we have discussed approximately a year ago, MACC investigation into Judge Nazlan.
Yeah. And just this month, right, so many things happened. And I think it was last month when the federal court came back with the decision because a group of lawyers initiated an action demanding clarification from the judiciary. Could MACC investigate judiciary? And so maybe, Lara, you want to just quickly sum up for us, the nitty-gritty, what's been happening, and then we will discuss the main points.
Yes, just for the benefit of our audience. So we have actually discussed this episode back in Season 4, Episode 8.
Yep.
So that's when there is this whole hoo-ha about MACC investigation into whether or not Judge Nazlan, he was acting like uncorruptedly. So that's the thing. So but at that time it was interesting because at that time CJ Tengku Maimun, she basically just come out and she was very bold. I think a lot of people were just saluting her boldness when she said when a need arises for judiciary to be criticized, then this should be done in a manner that is constructive and does not undermine its independence and public confidence in the judiciary. But what happened is that, so you have to go back to that time where all this investigation started from a hearsay, an allegation that comes from a fugitive blogger that is not even in Malaysia. And then you have this group of activists, Haris Ibrahim, they just sue for demanding an answer whether or not it is right for MACC to do all this thing. And then 1 year later, then you see somewhat a toned down statement from our Chief Justice.
Yeah, of course, a lot has changed. We have a new federal government. Yeah, and it's very interesting. I mean, this is an article February 24 this year, and it reads from malaysianow.com. Apex Court rules MACC probe against Judge Nazlan did not follow protocol. It's kind of toned down, like you say, but I just felt like it was so lame, It's like the judiciary could have an opportunity to really smack MACC and say you are out of line, you shouldn't do that. But politically, I can also understand because we have a new government, and if the federal court came down too hard, it's almost like slapping Anwar Ibrahim's government. I mean, that's my perception.
Yeah, maybe a little bit unbiased. I mean, quite biased in a sense.
Then, of course, I think in the midst of all these things, we have another added chili spice story, right? Which is Najib's counsel, Shafi, wrote to Azalina, the law minister.
Indeed.
And asked her, could you confirm that MACC report actually recommended disciplinary action against Judge Nazlan?
I mean, that is so absurd.
Yeah, and more absurd is Azalina replied yes. And so that would be another part. So today we basically want to look at three issues, which is the first one, of course, the MACC overstepped its power and authority, which we discussed in the Season 4 episode, but we want to kind of unwrap more since the decision from federal court is out. Then, of course, we want to talk about Azalina's conduct. And, does it create a perception of interference, or is it some wayang kulit for UMNO loyalists? Okay, that's number 2. And finally, we just want to talk about point number 3, generally the independence issue, which we have been talking on and off in this show. MACC, judiciary, how can we create a better system? There's no perfect system, but how can we do something that will ensure, something like judicial crisis will not happen again in Malaysia? All right, so with the first one, maybe we can look at some article.
Sure. I think perhaps we look at the part where C4 express. C4 is centered to combat corruption and cronyism. So this is where they were saying that they were going beyond their judiciary jurisdiction and powers because there exists no stipulations in the Act that will allow them to overstep into deciding whether or not a judge has violated the judge's code of ethics.
So for the benefit of our audience and listener, MACC is basically what we call a statutory body. It is created by law. So all the power and rights and whatever they can do must come from the Act. So in this instance, it's MACC Act. So it doesn't give them any power to investigate judiciary, especially senior judiciary, which Court of Appeal and Federal Court are considered senior judiciary because they are personally appointed by Agong.
Yeah, and they are considered the superior courts.
Yeah, superior court. So, of course, High Court is considered superior, but this is a different category altogether. So C4 look from a statute point of view.
Yep.
But what about, you kind of mentioned about the legal action taken by Haris Ibrahim and friends, right? What are some of their arguments against MACC?
Well, they argue that the declaration that criminal investigative bodies, including the MACC, they are not entitled to, or they are actually precluded from investigating serving judges. So I think our audience, they will need to understand that at that time, he still is our Justice Nazlan.
Yep.
He is the Court of Appeal judge. So basically, he's serving in the Court of Appeal. So the argument is that because he is a serving judge, so hence there should be precluded from investigating these people who are actually being appointed, like what you said, by the Prime Minister himself. So these judges, unless these judges were actually being suspended or removed respectively in line with the Federal Constitution article. So, or the public prosecutor is not empowered to institute or conduct any proceedings for any offense against such serving judge. So their argument is that because these judges, they are still serving, so hence they don't have, this executive body, they don't have any right to prompt investigation into all this.
Yeah, I think at this time maybe it will be helpful for us to just quote Tengku Maimun's her statement from her judgment. Now the judgment I already mentioned came out in February 24th, and now of course very much toned down. And what she said was, of course she used the word did not follow protocol, very, very mild, and she used the word could tarnish the image of independent or judiciary, etc., etc. And let me just see what was the thing she said. Okay, she said, look, the investigation was done without consultation with the judiciary. So I guess the federal court's interpretation would be if you want to investigate a sitting member of the judiciary, a court of appeal judge somewhere, you have to do it through the judiciary because, while we are discussing this, we should think about the whole doctrine of separation of power. Because if MACC is allowed to investigate judges, that means the executive is a kind of above the judiciary. So those are, of course, just from legal doctrine point of view. But basically, I think she was alluding to that, that we should investigate it ourselves, and there are code of conducts and things like that. But it's all kind of mild, right?
Yeah, because it's interesting though, because you say judges were considered to be citizens of the highest moral character, but her actions seems, so this is seems to suggest that there is somewhat a little bit not quite objective sort of judgment that is coming from the judiciary themselves.
Now, another very interesting thing she said, look, that a set of protocols must be followed when a judge is investigated, including seeking leave from the Chief Justice before conducting the probe. Okay, so two things here. First, you need leave from, basically leave means permission from Chief Justice. But what happens if the leave is given? Who does the investigation? The judiciary themselves or MACC?
Well, that's so interesting. It's almost like the leak in the Supreme Court in the United States before the Roe v. Wade opinion was being released.
Now, the whole thing about, if we talk about a nation with very clear separation of power like America, the executive and the legislative have no power over the Supreme Court at all. None at all. And in fact, even one of the President Andrew Jackson, he also said the same thing. He said, look, the judges and the executive were independent. So he was openly just kind of like, I don't care about the decision of the judges. I mean, it's like, you think about separation of power, if we take to the extreme, you know, can you see the kind of anarchy that could happen?
Yeah. But I guess it's a part of maturing of a nation.
Yeah, but but of course, to defend the American system, they do have clear protocol in the constitutions, and that's what we're a bit lacking, right, in Malaysia. You know, what is true independence? What are the safeguards? I mean, we just go back to 1988, the whole judicial crisis. How could the entire Supreme Court at that time be demolished by the Prime Minister? It's like, I mean, he now the Mahathir, of course, will say it's the Agong at that time, but it's like we all know it's him, right?
Yeah, at the advice of Prime Minister.
Yeah, but we'll come back to the independence issue a bit later. Now, let's talk about Azalina. So what happened with Azalina here?
Well, she replied to the letters.
By Shafi?
Yeah. Which is Najib's lawyers. So it's interesting because in the first place, why would there be any correspondences at all? Why don't Shafi and co, they just write into MACC and ask about the whole verdict? But in this case, she basically just replied to them. After that, she came out to be very, very defensive. She said, I'm merely just acting, the judiciary has, she said, only the judiciary has that authority to evaluate the breaches, the alleged breaches of ethics. So it's interesting, but it's almost like she is...
Yeah, it is very interesting because the letter was leaked out.
Yeah.
And the date of the letter was 20th of March, which was after the federal court decision. So some commentators say it's a contempt of court because we already say it's a wrong procedure.
Yep.
How could you say MACC has a right? You are the law minister.
Yeah.
You are the executive. MACC is under you.
Yep.
Are you challenging the judiciary?
Yeah.
So that is what is happening here. And that's why she sort of backtracked a little bit and, you know, send the aide come out and say, look, the letter is real, but we are just confirming what MACC reported. And then, of course, they backtrack even further by saying that, look, if Shafi really wants the information, he should write to MACC himself. And yeah, but we talk about the real reason behind this, and it's almost like an UMNO wayang kulit, right? That Azalina was from UMNO, Shafi representing Najib from UMNO. They needed to show their base that they were doing something. I don't know, that's the feel I get.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, even with our Deputy Prime Minister as well, Zahid, I mean, of course, his is
appear to be doing something.
Yeah, his is a different case altogether. I mean, of course, he's the main beneficiary of this whole thing. But Azalina would seem to be, because she is perceived to be a loyalist of Najib.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. And I mean, the thing about Zahid is like, you know, on one hand, he doesn't want Najib to come back because it would threaten his positions. But on the other hand, if you can create a doubt, at least in the mind of the public mind, that there was political persecution, then he could easily use the same argument for himself. Bear in mind that he's still facing a number of trials. So all these things will help him also, I imagine.
Yeah, perhaps so.
But anyway, Azalina's performance so far has been pretty good. You know, it's like she appears to be really seeking reform, you know, with the stateless issue, with the death penalty, whether you agree or not. You know, this, I mean, people, I personally is in favor of death penalty, but to give discretion, I think is not a bad thing because you have to consider case by case. You know, a lot of people kind of reacted to the proposed amendment by saying that we are taking death penalty away. Actually, we are not. We are giving discretion so that it's not mandatory death sentence immediately. So that's not the same thing, but somehow it's manipulated into saying that death penalty is taken away from the land.
It's just so interesting because, I mean, I was just recently watching World War II in colors again. And then it's so interesting because what happened with the German when they fought the war, then when they realized that when the D-Day happened, and then when they were just seeing how these Germans were getting their supplies, like when a certain machines break down, how do they repair it? And the propaganda was that it was just very machinized. And then what they saw was just all horse carriage going there. So I guess in the same way, it's almost like it's a lot of propaganda that is just flying around and then causing people to believe certain things that people just read certain headlines, and if the headlines is misleading, then that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we've been saying on and on here, right? That we have to come to a place where we are able to make a determination, separate the facts from the emotions.
Yep.
Okay, now to end today, we want to go back to the whole discussion on independence. I'm talking about the independence of institutions, judiciary, which we talk about many, many times here. Then, of course, MACC. Now, remember when... Now, by the way, we sort of forgot to mention our Prime Minister's response, right?
Yeah.
And Anwar Ibrahim sort of said, look, we will respect federal court decision. What does that mean? That means in future, MACC should never be allowed to investigate judiciary. I mean, that's how I interpret, know. So maybe Prime Minister sort of gave the assurance to the judiciary, and the judiciary sort of toned down the smacking. But anyway, that's just speculation on our part. But anyway, going back to Anwar Ibrahim, he said he was open to the facts, but he is very good at that. He always say, I'm open to this, but whether he actually do it is another matter. He said, I'm open to the fact that the parliament could be the confirming entity for MACC, making it truly independent. So what are some of your thoughts on creating more... I mean, I don't want to use the word independent so much. Maybe check and balance is a better word.
Yeah, I would suppose we are really just going back to the doctrine of separation of power.
Yeah.
I think it would be very, very interesting times for Malaysia because I felt like what PH really represents is that reform. So
structural reform, right?
Yeah, structural reform. So I think the people are anxious to see real reforms that is coming from the current government. And with our Prime Minister affirming that, I think that would be very, very interesting forward. Yes, I mean, barring aside that you could get some tyrants here and there, anarchists here and there, but that's besides the point, I think.
When you have too much independence, you're talking about, right?
Yeah, but I suppose there would be a proper protocol, like how if you can impeach a judge or not. Like those sort of things should be in place, but those sort of things are the ones that the executive will need to make. I mean, the lawmaking bodies will need to make in the parliament. So I think that would be very, very interesting because I guess personally I'm very much in favor of that. Although, yes, I guess the whole nation might swing into the other extreme of just having to go through a season of whereby you see maybe certain judges that really just like go over the place, crazy judges.
Yeah, like the activist judge. And so there's a whole thing. Now, it's very interesting because every system has pros and cons, and we talk about independent prosecutions, but MACC also has investigative power. And historically, under common law, the power to investigate and the power to prosecute are separated for the very reason that you can abuse them. So our legal system is called adversarial. That means you have to have enough information before you charge people. That's why there's a presumption of innocence. But you look at civil law system, which the French, Japan, Korea, so that's why if you watch a lot of K-drama, you look at the prosecutor, they have tremendous power because they are not an adversarial system. They investigate, they are the law. It's a bit like judge, right? I am the law. So French also a bit like that. So that is one of the reasons why I'm a bit weary of of course, people look at Hong Kong and say, or the ICAC, that was very, very unique time. The corruption went all the way up. Maybe people can say, look, Malaysia is the same. But I'm always a bit weary that you give prosecution and investigation power to the same body. that's why for the longest time, police will do investigations. Then you have the public prosecutor doing the charge and things like that. But of course, with MACC, it sort of fused a little bit already.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I'm all for independence, but we need to look at the mechanism to create check and balance, you know. So if Parliament could confirm, then maybe Parliament could impeach, for example.
That would be very interesting.
That would be interesting. But yeah, I mean, we talk about so often already. We are always in favor of more decentralization because so much of the evils in this nation came because too much power with the executive.
Yeah, too much concentration.
Any other thoughts on independence, MACC or judiciary?
Well, I suppose that really goes back to the fight that we have really, really seen over the last 2 years. I mean, even with the fourth branch, which is supposed to be independent. But you see the media just being assimilated into this whole thing. So I guess for me personally, I'm keen to really look at all this sort of reform. So really like having every branch really just executing their duties properly.
So nobody have too much power by themselves. And that's one of the things I heard from some of the political commentators in Indonesia, you know. And, you know, really, in Indonesia, they don't have such a systemic corruptions and abuse of power. And it's because their judiciary, their legislature, and they have very powerful regional governor also. Then they have their own religious body, they have their army, and they are all kind of, I won't say independent, but they are not like kawan-kawan terbaik, you know, those kind of thing. So I guess that's what we mean by, you know, nobody should have too much power, then the check and balance will be easier to implement. But the devil is in the detail, right? So we need to see the detail to see. So I mean, I welcome what Azalina said, you know, heading towards this, show us your bill, show us your 10 PowerPoints or whatever, and see if you can convince the people that you are a government that is for reform.
Yep.
Okay, I think our time is up, so it's been interesting. And, you know, the next time we come back, we'll look at some other things and hopefully we can update you with other aspects of the state of the nation. Now, of course, if you have any, to our viewers and listeners, if you have anything at all that you wish for us to discuss, you can write to us, put in the comments, and yeah, we can kind of explore those issues, right?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Maybe we can have comment section.
Yeah, or a live stream, that kind of thing.
Yep.
All right, so that's it for now.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.